I sometimes forget because I've been at Rippling since the very beginning. Like, I don't think of myself as the CRO. I don't think I'm like not approachable. I think I'm like, why wouldn't anybody reach out to me? Why did you guys wait so long to tell me this? And I think from their perspective, they're like, I've been here, 6 months. I'm in Australia. I've never met you. You're the CRO. Like, I didn't, I'm not going to shoot you a Slack about all these things that I have this feedback on. And so when you come in person and you open up that communication, I think that's just like a really important experience.
There's the stuff you need to do to grow your startup, and there's everything else: HR, IT, payroll, expenses, and more. Rippling handles everything in that second bucket, no matter where in the world your employees are. There's no such thing as a silver bullet, but Rippling kind of is one. No wonder they're growing so fast. Get your first 3 months free by visiting rippling.com/TSP. That's rippling.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode, in-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption, the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Matt Plank from Rippling.
And I'm Matt Loop from Rippling.
Today, we are here to talk about scaling sales. Now, in my experience, there are only two kinds of founders in the world: those who believe that sales is incredibly important to achieving their mission, and those who don't, but will soon. Sales starts as a bespoke, founder-led process, but if you want your startup to achieve its potential, at some point you will need to learn how to build a scalable sales team. So where do you start? How do you build a sales team that doesn't suck? How do you sell internationally? And what are some of the pitfalls to avoid? Joining me on the Startup Podcast today, we have not one, but two incredible sales team hyperscalers on the show, courtesy of our sponsor, Rippling. Matt Plank has had a meteoric rise in his sales career. He was an early employee at Zenefits. That was Parker Conrad's previous startup, and in many ways, the spiritual predecessor of Rippling. And after advancing rapidly there, he joined Rippling as their VP of Sales before being promoted to become their Chief Revenue Officer. Matt Loop has been scaling regional sales teams for the hottest tech companies for longer than some of you listening have been legally able to drive. Starting his career in the early days of Salesforce in Silicon Valley, Matt worked his way up to leading all of sales in Australia and New Zealand. He then moved across to LinkedIn, where he led enterprise sales first in Australia and New Zealand, and then in North America. After that, he led go-to-market for Asia Pacific at Slack, and is now doing it all again as VP and head of Asia at Rippling. That is Salesforce, LinkedIn, Slack, and Rippling. What an incredible CV. Plank, Loop, welcome to the Startup Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Yaniv.
I would have to say that sales is one of the most misunderstood of all the business functions from people outside of it, including for much of my career to me. So what does sales mean to each of you?
Well, I think first of all, I think of it as revenue versus sales. Just kind of the way that I think about my role, at least at Rippling, is really bringing revenue in the door. So new customer acquisition, what we refer to as cross sell. So selling additional products to existing customers, but then also providing a great experience, mitigating churn risk, and kind of overall retention of the customer base. And so I think of revenue as what drives the business, and sales is a really important, critical part of that, obviously, in bringing folks in the door kind of up front and then keeping them happy.
To me, two words come to mind: growth. It's often the function that is tasked to really go out and bring in customers to your product or service. And the second is relationships. It's about going out and building awareness, building connection, finding people that you can solve problems for, that your product or service can hopefully alleviate some pain. And so that's been a part of my DNA and something that I just absolutely love, and something that I think is critical to the success of any ambitious company wanting to grow.
I think for me, coming from the engineering and product side of the house, we'll talk a bit about tensions and the sort of the interesting discussions that come up between those two sides. But the learning journey for me has been very much about, okay, sales can sometimes have a reputation as just being, going out there and banging the drum. But as you say, it's much more subtle than that. And I think every product person early in their career has had that moment when they realize if you build it, they will come, just doesn't work. You need sales and marketing and all of that go-to-market function if you actually have a great product and you want it to get into people's hands, you want it to have the impact that you believe it should have, you want your business to have the growth that you believe it can have, then you need to be able to talk to customers and get them to understand why and how your product can help them solve their problem. And I think that to me is like really a core aspect of sales. The first salesperson at any company needs to be the founder. It's difficult to outsource sales at the very beginning before you even have product market fit. But very soon, if you have any success, you need to transition from founder-led sales to having a sales team. And, I'd love to hear, I think, Plank especially, you've had experience being part of the early phases of that transition. What does that look like? And what sort of people are able to thrive in that early stage?
At Zenefits, I was the 25th employee, and I started, 2 weeks after our VP of sales, who I actually followed to Zenefits. That's kind of how I ended up there. And so up to that point, they had just raised, I think, a $15 million Series A for Andreessen. They didn't have salespeople, right? Parker had done all the sales at that point. And I think when he started Rippling, it was unique in that when I started at Rippling, there were 5 of us in the basement of Parker's house. And there were, a handful of engineers and basically me and Parker. And I think most companies, you can't hire a VP that early. And one of the kind of core reasons is if you're looking for, great sales leader, they've got a lot of options, and joining a company that has 0 customers and 0 revenue is traditionally not a good one. Having said that, I had worked with Parker before, obviously. And so working with Parker, the bet was more on Parker and the vision than it was on previous traction that he had had. So it was a little bit of a unique opportunity in working with him. And I think the thing to remember is you really never stop being the chief sales officer as the CEO. The reality is it just changes what you're selling. In the early days, you've got to sell the customers and create the vision. But then every moment from then forward, you're really selling to investors, right? Like once you hire a sales org and you build it out, when you need to go raise money and continue to grow the business and invest, you're sitting there giving the best pitch of all time to investors. And I think Parker has obviously been very successful at fundraising. And part of the reason is because he really understands the business and the vision and what works and what doesn't work. So I think even though he's not, talking to prospects and selling customers up front, he's certainly deeply involved in sales.
It's definitely true that founders stay involved in sales. One of the things that I hear from other founders I talk to and so on is that the transition from the founder being the chief salesperson, though, in that sales function, to having a sales team is a dangerous one, right? It's one that you can get wrong quite easily, where the founder's out there closing deals and so on. Then they're like, I'm busy, my team is growing, I have other responsibilities. I need to bring on salespeople. And they go out and they bring on those salespeople, sometimes with the VP of sales, sometimes bottom up, which is another thing I'd love to discuss with you. And they just can't close. It doesn't work. And so I think one of the things that our listeners will be interested in, and that, they might be making that transition, they might have experienced that failure in the past, is how can you make sure that you move from that mode where the founder is the only person who knows how to sell the company's product to actually having other people who can do just as well or even better than them in making those sales?
I think one thing is, when I joined Rippling as the VP of sales, you mentioned kind of VP of sales or bottoms up. And in my opinion, it's the same thing. Like I was the sales rep when I joined. There were no sales reps. And so I was taking the demos, I was learning the product. And I think if you're truly early stage as a company, you have to make sure that the person coming in is willing to do the job, like directly take it over from the CEO, not hire a team of sales reps and then you're passing from CEO to sales reps. You need to get in the trenches, get your hands dirty, write the script, make the pitch deck, talk to prospects, send contracts, close deals, manage it in Salesforce, right? You've got to do all of that. I think in the early days, it's really critical to not hire someone who thinks that's not their job. And so I think you kind of get the best of both worlds by hiring kind of your best rep that you can imagine, but who can also operate as a VP and kind of get, 2-in-1 with that.
So I think there's kind of 3 phases that I've certainly experienced or seen. Not so much the experience that Plank's been able to have, literally being with Parker, co-founder, and that transition from him getting his vision built into product and then over time handing the reins to Plank to steer the ship on the sales front. That's one. And obviously that needs to happen smoothly with Parker still, of course, remaining heavily involved in how we sell here today. Then it's the foundational team. And for me, I think when you're building that team, and I consider myself to a degree a founder of Rippling in Asia, and have that kind of founder mindset mentality. When I'm hiring that team, or when I've hired the team that we have in place today, it's deeply focused around culture, the values alignment of who we are and what we're trying to build. This is things like resiliency. They're deeply committed to the mission of this business. They're very much taking a long-term view. They're very open and understanding of the challenges and pitfalls of being part of a business in this level of scale, that they understand that challenges come up every single day, that you need to build playbooks. You need to do a lot of the infrastructural stuff that already exists at a bigger company. You got to get that right. You got to have the right people on board the ship in the beginning. You also, I think, need to try to over-index on domain expertise and the local market experience. So we're selling HR, finance, IT solutions in the Australian market. I have a lower risk tolerance to hire people that have not had experience selling here or experience selling the suite of products that we sell. I think you need to get all of that as tight as possible on the foundational team at launch. The next phase, which is really building towards the next phase, happens in the foundational team, what I call homegrown, or using maybe a baseball analogy, which might not be as relevant to an Australian audience, but
We have a global audience, so it's all good.
that's very true. But it's this idea of a farm system. And beginning this process of building a homegrown sales team. This happens kind of 18 to 24 months in. We're 12 months in at Rippling now, so we're like 6 to 12 months away from this. But this is when you start to see the junior teams, the BDRs, or the entry-level salespeople evolve to become your next group of incredible sales hires. Benefits to this: it's lower cost than going out to market and hiring experienced reps. It establishes a culture of professional development, which is appealing for new hires. They can see that if they join, there's progression in their careers if they stay here. The ramp time is almost nothing. They've been selling and talking about our product for 12 to 18 months. And so this is a huge part, and the best companies, so I spent 10 years at Salesforce, they were incredible at this. The best sellers were almost always homegrown at Salesforce. It started in that BDR, SDR team. In my time, I was lucky enough to have Aaron Ross, who wrote the Bible, Predictable Revenue, that so many SaaS companies have used. He was our leader. He was the one who was building the next generation of sellers. And so I think you teach those foundational skills, and I know that we've got data that shows our best sellers at Rippling, certainly in the US where they're a bit more mature, have come from folks that we've grown from within.
That's really interesting. So I think trying to bring all of that together, put yourselves in the shoes of a founder who doesn't have a sales background. Let's say they come from a product background and they have been selling the product themselves. And now they're like, I need to hire my first sales hires. What sort of profile would you look for? And kind of bring it together as, Plank, you mentioned that you should get a VP first. Loop, you mentioned domain expertise. Like, how do you find the person who you're really going to be able to hand off a lot of that to and get the kernel of that sales team being built?
There's a couple of things I think that are really important to get right. And, obviously all the stuff that Loop said when you talk about mission, culture, values, all that kind of stuff got to align, obviously. But I think really one of the bigger things for me is the type of sales motion that you have. I have spent the last 12 years between Zenefits and Rippling selling hyper growth, extremely fast velocity, to companies. In the early days, it was, called 5 to 100. Maybe today it's up to, 2,500 employee companies, but the majority of our business probably being companies that are under 1,000 employees. And the reality is like sales cycles that are 2 weeks in SMB or 6 weeks in mid-market or, 12 weeks up market, that's a totally different sales motion than somebody. And if somebody wanted to go sell to, Fortune 550, Fortune 500 employee companies, I would definitely not be the right person, right? And so no matter what success you've had and how good you've been at a particular thing, it's really about trying to find the alignment of sales process, velocity, customer profile, the industry that you're in. One of the reasons that I was useful to Parker in the early days, it wasn't because I had all these insights of what does a VP of sales do. I had never managed a team more than 40 people. I had never been a VP, but it was really like a very, very deep understanding of our market, the people we're selling to, the value prop. I was doing the high velocity, large volume, dozens and dozens of deals every month. I was doing that at Zenefits. And so that experience was very plug and play. And I think that really helped me ramp. And then you hopefully, if you hire right, you hire someone that has like the ceiling, right? You're kind of hiring for like slope. You're not hiring for like where they are necessarily in their experience. you've got to hire for somebody that has the aptitude in the kind of steep slope. And if you get them early enough in their career, you get all these benefits from someone who has no entitlements, expectations. They're happy to be there and do the job. And then if you get lucky and you're right, then that person, and really honestly, every year, every 18 months, you've got to like reevaluate that. A lot of people will grow and the business changes, and over time you might find that you need something a little bit different. But I do think it's important to hire for sales process alignment. People that have sold enterprise their entire life and not high velocity are probably not going to do good in a very high velocity SMB sale. And someone who's done a lot of SMB high velocity is not going to be good in a strategic upmarket deal. Like those things are just very different.
Okay, so let me play that back to you to see if I've got it right. So I know there's obviously more than one playbook, but I think what you're saying is your first hire should be a VP of sales, but when you hire that person, you're not prioritizing previous VP of sales experience. You're prioritizing domain expertise, sales motion alignment, cultural alignment, and so on. So your first person is a VP of sales who is an experienced domain expert salesperson. And then your next few hires should actually be juniors who that VP of sales can effectively take under their wing, train up. They have very high ceiling and they can quickly become the sorts of sales team that you need. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think that aligns. And as you go up, it's, your SDR become account executives, your account executives become managers, your manager might be your first director. And like at some point, as you get much larger, then you start to think, okay, if I need VPs or my team is, 30, 40, 50 sellers, at some point you do want to start to bring in outside folks that really just have a different perspective and have seen some scale. But I do think extending that first stage, I don't know, Luke, if you had anything to add there.
I think all of that's right. I think the expectation setting for all the hires is a really critical part. You need to make sure that they understand what they're in for when you're part of a startup, where you don't have that scale yet. It isn't necessarily a market leader or highly proven. It's a roller coaster ride. They have to have the stomach to get on board and go through that. There's going to be high expectations on a person to probably go outside of the traditional AE role. They're going to need to build the playbooks. They're going to need to do a lot of the things that might just be done for them at a bigger company. And so, what you don't want when you're a small business, if you get one hire wrong, it's like if someone has a cough, everyone catches a cold, right? If you get one person wrong, it has a massive impact in those early days. And so I think, yes, the experience, but more so the attitude and the cultural fit, deeply understanding what they're getting in for. You just don't want to miss on that. And I think sometimes I've seen companies just get that wrong. They go for the person who is X, whatever, Microsoft or a big company, because they think that that's going to come in and that experience and credibility will just lend itself to helping scale the business. And it's not always right.
And of course, that's true in other functions as well, like in engineering or product management or anything else that, the big company person often is used to having too much done for them. But from my understanding and experience in sales, it's even a little bit more than that. And I think you're sort of hinting at that, Luke, which is there are these three stages to a sales team. We've covered the first two, right? You've got the founder-led sales, then you've got your foundational sales team, and then you've got your sales team at scale, which I'd love to come back to. My understanding of scaled sales teams is you want to have a very well-defined playbook. You want to have clear collateral that is being produced by marketing and sales ops and whatever else it is. And you have people who you can bring in and very quickly onboard them and getting them selling in a consistent way. But at the beginning, you don't get to do that, right? Because to your point, the playbooks haven't been written. You don't know what works. You're still figuring it all out. You don't have high quality collateral. The positioning is still being figured out itself. And so it's nearly like it's not just that someone coming from a big company may be unused to that. It's that there are a whole set of skills that need to be exercised more on the discovery side that they may never have had to exercise because they're good at selling at scale. Is that about right?
Yes, I think that's exactly right.
I guess also when you're bringing in your VP of sales, you'll want to look at someone who has been in that foundational stage of a sales team and not just sort of big name, mid-level person from Google or wherever.
I think one of the last things, just to kind of ladder up to the, like what's the next phase or the next phase, I think you get to a point when you're hiring people and you're building for the culture and you're promoting a bunch of people within. One of the really easy things to do that I've seen happen a lot, you keep the organic promotion thing been going a little too long, because you've built these people who've been just like incredible assets to the company. They've been there 3 years, 4 years, but they just get to, you kind of promote to like not necessarily like a maximum level of competence in the role, but like too quickly. Like the role, if the company's growing so quickly, some people can grab onto it and keep scaling. But honestly, like the majority of people don't. They at some point they get to a place where the role just has kind of outgrown them. And I think as a VP or owner of revenue, you really have to be able to recognize that. And really good companies, we've been very lucky to have this at Rippling. You don't fire those people. You talk to them about, hey, this particular role has kind of outgrown you. If you've done it the right way, they're generally like, I'm feeling that too. It's stressful. It's hard. I'm not sure what to do. And you kind of just put them in a different track within the company. You let them keep scaling. Maybe you hire over them. Maybe you partner someone with them. But I think to be able to keep all of that organic talent and then recognize when it's time to hire somebody else to come into the business that does bring some relative context from maybe a bigger company or, some new region, a la Loop in this case, who just has the playbook on day one and knows all that stuff. And you to be able to do that while keeping all of the organic high growth employees in the business in different places, I think is a really critical thing. And people botch this all the time. They ride a great employee for 3 or 4 years and then they handle it poorly. That employee gets upset and then they leave. And it's like, you just lost this really critical part of the DNA of the company. And it doesn't have to be that way. If you kind of just communicate, manage expectations, you kind of get the best of both worlds.
I feel like a thread that's going through all of this conversation is that a lot of these things that happen in sales, they're the same as phenomena you see in other functions, but just more so, more accelerated. In other functions, it's like, yeah, sure, if you're growing quickly in engineering, you try to promote from within, but pretty soon you're like, oh, okay, I just need someone with more years of experience, because I guess that there are, in a sense, more hard technical skills, hard as opposed to people skills and soft skills like that. I don't mean it's more difficult. But with sales, I guess you can go further by like bringing up your own talent, but there's still a ceiling you might hit, and then it's sort of harder to tell.
Particularly because in sales, this is probably true in all professions, but it's definitely true in sales, that the characteristics that make you a really, really good seller in the early days of a company don't have very much overlap with the skills that make you like a really good leader. The job bifurcates like pretty quickly from I'm talking to prospects, customer facing, closing deals, to being able to take a little bit more of a back seat and coach and develop and not take over and lead all the time. And so, some people, they make the transition and then they don't even like it themselves, right? But they're usually not one to raise their hand and say, let me go backwards. I don't really like this leadership thing very much. And so
actually, that was a question I kind of had in the back of my mind when you were talking about the shape of the VP of sales who you should hire, who is someone who is a good, experienced salesperson. I agree with you completely that in the early days, that VP of sales, it's a very different thing from what happens later on when the VP of sales is actually an executive and a manager of a team. And I would imagine that some people, obviously you've made that transition very successfully, but a lot of people just wouldn't. So I guess, is it often the case that you have an early VP of sales and then unfortunately you need to replace them or, bring in someone over the top of them as you start scaling the team?
I think so. And look, the reality is at some scale, and I can't remember how long ago this was at Rippling, but the CRO really becomes the head of like revenue operations. At the end of the day, like I have a head of revenue operations and he's incredible. He's my right hand. But the reality is your job is about planning well, putting people in the right position at the right time, not getting overextended, doing it efficiently, attracting talent across the company. For generally, I aim to hire people that are overqualified in every role that I can. And if you're a company that's doing well, you can do that. You hire folks that believe in, Matt's a great example, going from, Salesforce to LinkedIn to Slack, and then being literally the employee number 1 in Australia with no sales reps, no SDRs, no leads, no nothing. It takes a very specific type of company to attract someone like that. And then it takes a very specific type of person to like have the foresight to be like, this next 12 months might be kind of crazy for me, but I believe in the future and the vision later. And so I wish I spent more time on customer calls and being in the trenches and helping win deals. I miss those days probably more than anything about my job. So you've got to kind of like the spreadsheet, the modeling, like the strategy part of it. That becomes a much bigger part of the role as the company gets bigger. And I think some people, they may struggle with doing that well, or they may honestly not like that part of the job very much. It's a lot less glamorous.
You never want to lose the scrappiness and just, Plank's in Australia with us this week, and I know that he's felt the vibes, us being kind of a startup mindset right now in Australia to getting back to the roots. As a leader, he very much is still close to the business, close to, many things that he would have been in the early days. And I think that's really important. In fact, it's like a cultural value that we have, which is never not your problem, or we also call it go and see. And so no matter how small something might be, Plank will get into it with me and go to seek to understand how we can solve a problem that's hurting us in the business and come up with a solution. And I think you were talking about at some point, do you bring in another level of leader? And look, I've seen companies that have done that. I think it's failed every place I've seen it. When I look at Salesforce, we got to a certain level of scale where the people that had gotten it to a certain size then had people that largely came from Oracle because they had built the business to 3 billion, 4 billion, 5 billion. Majority of those, in my opinion, failed. Cultural rejection didn't kind of keep up with the speed of a faster moving Salesforce business. Perhaps we're used to all of that infrastructure that was there. And you look at Salesforce now, employee number 13, Brian, is leading the business. So the people that have been homegrown, and in some cases, they've had boomerangs come back. The people who were in there for the scrappy early days of scaling it up are still now back there leading the company at 35 plus billion. So I don't subscribe to that idea of having to get to another type of leader that you bring in. I think the people that build it up, culture and the business, can stay with it and grow with it ongoing.
This goes well beyond sales. And I think there's always that tension. And of course, with a CEO as well, or, very common with CTOs. The interesting thing in engineering is a lot of CTOs do not wish to become leaders of large organizations. And the way that's solved in a lot of companies is you have the CTO, who's the original technologist and technical visionary, and then you bring in a VP of engineering to do all the people stuff. It seems like that framework maybe doesn't exist as much in sales.
It's funny you mention, most VP, like I would almost argue, maybe controversial, but most great leaders do not go into anything thinking they want to manage big teams. It was certainly never part of
That's a
my,
good point.
upbringing. I was never, people ask me all the time, like, hey, could you ever see this and that? And it's like, I can't even remember. I remember having 5 reps as much as today my org is, I think, 1,200 people. And like, I don't remember it. Like, I can remember it vividly when it was 5 and I remember it now. And I think my interaction, nowhere along the way was I like, more people, more power, what I want to do. It's just like, if you're successful, that kind of happens and you'll hit little pockets where it gets really stressful and you're like, man, I'm missing something here, a leader over here, split this team, change the go-to-market strategy. But I think the right leaders get into it to get their hands dirty and do it themselves. And then if things are working, you kind of just keep bumping up the road and hopefully keep scaling.
An analogy just occurred to me. I don't know where I'm going with this, so tell me if I'm totally off the reservation, but it feels to me like this has more in common with how the military works, right? Like every general started out as a private. You don't like hire your generals in from somewhere else. And of course, a general in most cases is effectively a manager of people. And most of the time these days it's a desk job, and it's definitely not what they were doing when they were a private. And yet they came up through the ranks. And it feels like, I don't know if it's to do with the role of the job or just the types of people it attracts or the culture that tends to be in sales. But all the things you've said, it's sort of like how you bring up talent internally makes it feel that there's this much stronger emphasis than in other functions on it all has to be homegrown or largely homegrown.
Sales is such a meritocracy where there's a scoreboard every month. The results are obvious. You don't have to worry about somebody being like, did this person deserve it? Were they better? Like in sales, it is generally obvious that you're doing well and you're growing. And so I think if you're asking your team to push extremely hard, you have high expectations, you want as close to perfection as you can get, being somebody and demanding those things when you've never done that yourself, it's pretty hard to get salespeople to buy into that. And so I do think in sales in particular, our organic promotions, and even if they're not, like obviously everything can't be organic, but even when I look at people that move laterally over from a company, the number one attribute that I look at for anybody by far and away, whatever they say in an interview, whatever I can get out of an evaluation, is people that were promoted rapidly within a company. There's a lot of people that get promoted once and it might not work out. But if you're getting promoted twice, 3 times, 4 times in the same company, there's just something about the DNA, the ability to solve problems. And so when I'm trying to promote my own organic promotions and when I'm bringing somebody in from the company, I'm frequently looking for like somebody else's organic promotion, right? Maybe they got to some point where the business didn't work, but you can pull them over and people kind of respect the track record. One of our best leaders in the US was SDR, sales manager, sales director, VP, SVP at a competitor. And it's kind of like we didn't get to organically grow them, but you can just see that from their background at different companies. And I think bringing more people like that into your sales culture is really powerful because people kind of believe that, they're not going to ask you to do things that they haven't done themselves or that they wouldn't do themselves again.
I think a penny just dropped for me. What's the real difference? You talked about the scoreboard being highly visible in the same way that nearly every sales team on earth has quotas and commission on those quotas, which seems very successful. But if you try to have performance-based bonuses applied to product teams, those tend to be a total failure and make things worse. And so I think the idea of having just that really tight feedback loop and that scoreboard actually makes meritocracy purer, leaves less room for politics, and makes it cleaner. So I think that actually explains a lot of the differences, I think, between sales teams and product and other non-sales teams. You know what founders hate? All that back office busy work that goes into operating a company. I'm talking about HR, onboarding, offboarding, payroll, EOR, LMS, IT. The list seems endless. And for each of these things, you have a separate vendor, a separate invoice, a bunch of integration headaches. No more. Rippling is doing something miraculous. Building a single all-in-one workforce platform for your global workforce. A single vendor, fully integrated for all your HR and IT needs. So you can focus on what matters, building your startup. They even have a special offer for TSP listeners. Get 3 months absolutely free if you go to rippling.com/TSP. That's rippling.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast. I wanted to talk about going global. We have listeners all over the world. We have listeners in over 100 countries, right? And so if you're in the US, you can probably stay in your own country for a long part of your growth journey. But if you are founded in a smaller country, going global is something you often have to do relatively early. So I know it's something a lot of our listeners think about, a lot of our listeners ask about. And Luke, I think, you're the going global expert. You're the regional expansion expert, having done it your 4th time now at absolutely fantastic tech companies. So I guess I wanted to ask you, when you start doing this, when you're like, okay, I'm going from the mothership to a new territory and I'm trying to grow the product there, try and grow the market there, what are the key things to watch out for and how do you make it work?
The headline answer is it depends.
Okay, that's it. You're out of the show, man. That's it.
I'll unpack what I mean by that. Maybe a couple things to speak from on my experience. Being an American and, having grown companies for a 4th time in Australia. Number one is, not showing up as the worst of America. Like, don't come in here with an arrogance or an air that we know what's best and that the way it's done over there is going to be replicated here. While the U.S. is often acknowledged as a leader in technology and the perspective is respected, it loses that luster when it's delivered in the wrong way. So I've had to make sure that as we've launched in Australia or more broadly in Asia, that you're very thoughtful about that you're kind of adjusting tone and tenor appropriately to align with cultural norms, and so that it'll be accepted. What I see is a lack of research into local requirements as being a big issue. And back to my comment on it depends, I've had 3 experiences where on the product side in particular, it wasn't that big of a deal. Salesforce works the same in the US as it does here. LinkedIn, for the most part, the same. The membership is different, but the monetized B2B products that they sell are all the same. Slack, same. Rippling has been a very interesting one where everything is unbelievably unique. Payroll is one of our offerings, and the complexities and nuances and wild differences from the US, the UK, India, where we had offices established, to what's required in Australia is huge. And so that is a big kind of dependency. And thankfully, we had, an STP V2 certified payroll product. All of that kind of infrastructure and hard yards were done before I arrived. So the product was a fit. And there's just an ongoing ton of lessons. Because I was hired as first on the ground, I didn't necessarily have the opportunity to do that research myself. And so my advice would be for companies going into a new market, they need to do all of that legwork. We will launch in Asia at some point in the future. I will have 6 to 12 months of leeway before we land in those markets to do all of the prep work that we need to do to successfully launch and, have as little friction in the market as possible when we do launch there. The other item I would say is hugely important is the network. If you're going from Australia to the US, and you're going to, perhaps as a founder, go there and set up shop and start to build the business. If you do that cold turkey with not having spent a year, maybe 2, to develop the partnerships, the early adopter customers, even before you make that investment, I think you're doing it incorrectly. I work closely as an advisor to a friend of mine, and his move to the US recently. I think he spent 3 to 4 years before supplanting himself to build the US business, just building network with the VCs. He had 5 to 10 early adopter customers and advisors that were part of that early adopter program. And so he was immediately in and had an active business and a bit of brand awareness and product market fit before he started hiring out his team there. So I'd say having that local ecosystem, investing in that, in some cases, perhaps years before you go into that market, would be guidance I'd provide.
One really common mistake that I think is, and you phrased the question in an interesting way, that different from US companies. But for example, for US companies, I think one common mistake, this is really true about anybody that has a good business in any local country. Like, one of the things that happens is you get a bunch of earned and organic top of funnel, whether that's in press or it's, people come to your website because they heard about you locally. You have customers that refer people, that are word of mouth. And what happens when you're a company is that stuff you can't earn, right? My reps, of course, are give me more demo requests, people that come in and find us. And it's you can't actually, there's no coin operated machine there. You got to earn that over time. But that's essentially companies that do that really well. They basically afford themselves the opportunity to invest in other paid channels, paid acquisition channels that tend to be more expensive. And oftentimes that kind of free local market customers that come in kind of help you blend with a paid acquisition strategy so that all in together, blended, you can grow the business and scale it, and you can turn up the paid acquisition channels while offsetting some of the costs with the organic stuff. And I think one of the things that people sometimes make a mistake is they'll have a US team where there's tons of free organic type of top of funnel acquisition. They pay a bunch of money in all these different channels and it all works. Then they go to a new market and they're let me turn on my coin operated kind of paid channel, but they don't have any of the organic word of mouth, press, blog post, content, whatever. And they end up really upside down on their kind of efficiency cost. And so I think it's really important that when you go into a new market, you have to understand that, and you have to allocate your budget in a way where you are spending things that are not direct demand. They don't produce a demo tomorrow. You got to do some of that. You put some budget in places where you can just go get yourself in front of people that are shopping and capture the intent. But then you have to spend money in things that are more long-term to build, but that you believe will accrue some of that brand recognition over time. And I think that's the really important thing, because that's the only way you can scale paid acquisition channels is by making sure that you're also creating the more enduring customer acquisition stuff that I think a lot of people skip over because it's harder. You kind of jump into these markets and don't want to resource the people that it takes to build some of that stuff, but it's really important to actually scale it long term to do both of those things.
So that homegrown advantage is real, I think is what I'm hearing you say. And one of the mistakes people make is not recognizing that they're benefiting from that. And so then they go international, and it's always harder than whatever you did at home. And you need to plan for that. You need to equip for that. You need to resource the team for that. You need to set the team goals appropriately for that. Where I've seen this go wrong is a combination of two things. One is sending a team out there with unrealistic expectations and without that element of patience. And I think, it's tricky, right? You want to grow fast. Rippling is growing like crazy, right? And I'm sure, Luke, you want it to grow like crazy in Australia too, but there's groundwork that needs to be done, I suppose, to establish yourself as a local.
I love that you're reminding my leader, Blank, everything is harder when you go international. He hears it enough from me. But the other thing I would say is that it's helped me profoundly, not to blow too much smoke, towards him, but to have leadership that listens, that is constantly seeking to understand the nuances and differences in these markets and adjust accordingly. And it's not just Plank, it's Parker, it's everyone, always seeking to understand how we need to do things differently and course correct from what the norm is and what they know from the US domestic growth.
And that's actually the other thing where, it's related. Lupe, you mentioned that your previous 3 companies, basically the product worked the same way all over the world. And so in a sense, you're going through it maybe somewhat for the first time with Rippling, where the product works differently in different parts of the world. And again, my experience with that has been you can get this dynamic, and I hope I'm not going to cause any tension in what looks like a beautiful relationship, where I've been on both sides of this. The international team feels like a lonely, neglected outpost. They're like, we're trying to sell this thing, but the market is telling us we need this feature, it needs to work this way, and it doesn't have it, and we're telling HQ, and HQ is ignoring us, and we just want our own product resources, but the CPO is saying we can't because it's not how they want to run their team. And that's sort of the dynamic where things can sort of fall apart a little bit. So I guess my question, again, to both of you is, how do you make sure that the global teams or the international expansion teams are being heard and are getting what they need to be able to actually succeed in those countries or in those regions?
I speak back to our values showing up in how we're going about international, which is never not your problem. Go and see, go understand what the problem is. Don't pawn it off to someone else. And our senior leaders have that exact attitude. Our COO, Parker, Plank, they're constantly doing that. You're right. You can have 2 schools of thought or, a wide range on the spectrum. On one hand, you've got a leadership team that's open, empathetic, and have active ears on what's needed in those markets. You could have a stubborn, ignorant, on the other side, leadership team that says, well, this is the way it's done in the States, just do it this way. And they're not open or flexible and understanding that, every market's different. Europe is wildly different than the US. Asia, wildly different. Tons of countries within Asia, wildly different from one another, and you have to adjust accordingly. It might mean resourcing things differently. It might mean we have different headcount or hires that we don't have in other markets. And again, thankfully, this is something that I vetted out in my interview process. I understood how we were thinking about internationally scaling, how decision-making would work. They've empowered me, kind of given my experience, to kind of steer the ship. And also, without having a supporting leadership team, I'd be doomed. It wouldn't be a fun experience.
I think there is one really critical thing that really has to happen. Well, I think 2 things. The first thing is you have to come here. I mean, literally, I'm here in Sydney this week with the team, and the amount of conversations that I've had in the 3 days I've been here so far, whether it's in the office sitting at the desk or a scheduled meeting or just at the happy hour kind of, after work, I've probably had, 30-minute conversations with at least 10 different people about, hey, let me explain to you this implementation thing that's just different in the US, right? We've got these onboarding guides and videos that we give people, we just need to localize them for Australia. They're 90% exactly the same, but we need to localize. And then from their perspective, they probably have been screaming about that internally, talking to each other about it for probably way longer than I imagine. In the middle of our conversation, I write a Slack message to our, VP of implementation, the person that owns content. I'm like, hey, here's the top 5 videos, the top 5 courses in our Rippling education that we want to localize. Here's the links to them. They're 90% the same. My team in Australia will help you figure out what needs to be localized. How quickly do we think we can get this done? And it was the answer was yeah, absolutely. This makes tons of sense. We can do this. And so without all the Slack messages and the emails that go back and forth and stuff, it's really hard when you're sitting in the US to be able, the amount of stuff you can get done from literally just being present for a week and just having the conversations, being approachable. I sometimes forget because I've been at Rippling since the very beginning. I don't think of myself as the CRO. I don't think I'm not approachable. I think I'm why wouldn't anybody reach out to me? Why did you guys wait so long to tell me this? And I think from their perspective, they're I've been here, 6 months. I'm in Australia. I've never met you. You're the CRO. I didn't, I'm not going to shoot you a Slack about all these things that I have this feedback on. And so when you come in person and you open up that communication, I think that's just a really important experience. And then I think the second thing is, this is really critical. Parker and I, because we've known each other for almost 12 years now, have a very trustworthy relationship around what is a legitimate product thing that is blocking us and what is like an excuse. And the reality is that sales, it's in our DNA and our nature to like, you lose a lot. No one's ever like, hey, I lost the deal because I got outsold by somebody, like we should have won, but this competitor just kind of like convinced them it was on me. Like, even though that's often sometimes what happens, the instinct is to be like, we didn't have a thing, we didn't have this, we didn't have that, we didn't have these things, right? And it's not even like shame on them. It's like, that's just the way that it is. Your own brain is kind of like, we're missing these things, and that's why I didn't win the deal. And I think the reality is the further down you go to an account executive, for example, there's just a little bit of a recency bias. Like the thing that is the most important thing is the thing that happened in the deal that you just lost yesterday. And so it's really important for like the sales leadership team to like write down the list of things that are most important and critical and give me your, signed in blood, this is the priority. And if you get that list and it's not 500 things, it's like, these are the 5 things per category or 10 things total. Then when I take that list and I can go to Parker and say, Parker, these are the things that are blocking us in order from like growing more in this market. He's like, you promise? And it's like, yes, 100%. There's data that backs it up, but he's not going to look at all the data and the dashboards. Like, he doesn't have time for that as a CEO. And so it's a commitment between my sales leaders and me, and then a commitment between me and Parker and the R&D org to be like, these are the things. And if you build these things, like I'm committing to like revenue growing faster, right? More customers, like having an impact on that. And I just think it's really important to, as a sales leader, to understand that if you're lucky and your founder listens to you, right? Your product team listens to you and they take you for your word and they go build stuff based on your conviction, you have to be right. It's like investing R&D resources and building stuff that doesn't move the needle is just like unbelievably painful and a setback. And so if you have conviction, you validate that with enough people in the office and the customers, then you kind of get that partnership, you build stuff and it works. And then it's a cycle that just repeats itself. The engineering team sees the thing that they built, you close a new customer because they built it, and everybody's enthused by that and they're happy to keep building things. And that's certainly the DNA in our culture between sales and product is like very, very tight alignment in that way.
That's a really simple and profound and difficult thing you've talked about there, Plank, right? Which is it's all about relationships and trust, ultimately, right? It's like trust between the different parts of the company, trust between different regions, like getting on a plane. I completely agree. It's like COVID nearly killed that idea, but then it turned out we were wrong.
It matters, yeah.
I worked at Google for a long time and I was never in headquarters in Mountain View, but one of the things that Google did well then, I think maybe less so now, is that they made it really easy for anyone in any role to get on a plane and spend some time with their peers in other offices. And it made a huge difference. We're a very technology forward company always. And yet the importance that was placed on building in-person trust in the same room was always very high. And I think that's so important. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and again, over my career, guys, like, my perspective has changed a lot on this, but this talk of like some companies being product led and some companies being sales led, and also companies where sales and product are always angry at each other. Sales is like, product's killing my ability to close deals, and products like sales is always like selling stuff we don't have without our permission. I'm sort of interested in your thoughts. And also, maybe I'd start with the question, is a certain amount of tension between product and sales team actually natural and actually desirable to have within a company?
I don't think it needs to be created, and I think some companies do that. I hate the idea of an organization almost self-branding themselves as product-led or sales-led. To me, it's demeaning the other side of the partnership, and it cultivates this like environment of superiority and us versus them. And I think when you do that, you get unnecessary tension, you get crappy collaboration between the two parties. It makes it a pain in the ass to recruit. I'll give an example. I loved my time at Slack. They are the PLG masters, right? Most companies that go a PLG motion look to them as the gold standard. It was an unbelievably incredible resource of top of funnel for us. Tons of free workspaces, tons of paid customers that came in through that avenue. But, bless Stuart, there was an article, he came out and said, we don't ever anticipate hiring salespeople, effectively diminishing the importance of them in the organization. And I can tell you, Slack doesn't get sold for $26 billion unless there's a sales team that took all those free workspaces or $2,000 spend that was all shadow IT at an enterprise and sold a proper enterprise agreement and supported those companies to scale. I don't know why that was created. You have Atlassian, who's kind of done the same. You could argue Canva has kind of had that mentality, but Atlassian's scaling up their enterprise business. Canva just had a big enterprise launch in the US.
Yeah.
I don't know why they almost self-imposed that tension between the orgs and potentially made it hard to recruit there. Like, I had a couple of opportunities presented to me over the years to join Google at different phases. And when I actually talked to people inside there, they said there's no sales culture. Like, sales is a third-class citizen. It's an engineering org, and scared me off. Amazing company, but even their own employees had been brainwashed to believe that. So I think it's hugely important that there's mutual respect both ways. And without question, my experience at Rippling has been the best in terms of the collaboration between product. Something that's pretty outlier about us, we spend north of 60% of our revenue on R&D. So sales is hugely important in the success and the scaling of product. Product is unbelievably important, and the differentiator, the platform we've built, is what is unique about us and what customers want. So there's this great yin and yang that exists between us. And the collaboration, communication, whether it's product listening to sales gong calls, whether it's sales constantly updating the priority list with quantified numbers as to why this is important, that dynamic is unbelievably healthy. And I don't think we espouse to be an engineering-led org or a product-led org or a sales-led org. I think we have two great businesses, world-class on both sides of the house.
I would just add quickly, I think, branding yourself as product led, it really just gives yourself a ceiling of what you could be, right? It kind of means that some of your core differentiation is like price. You're cheap, you're easy to set up. You know what I mean? If you're trying to get a premium for price and you've built a product that you think is superior and you've invested 60% of your revenue in R&D when the average company's, spending 20% of revenue, it's like, if you do all of those things, you generally need to get on the phone to convince somebody of that. We've invested in our product. It's like, if you're looking at in our market, every vendor has like a PDF checklist of like the products and features that they do. And you really got to be able to get into the product itself and walk them through a demo and show them use cases. And it takes a lot of effort to convince people of the value in the product that warrants the deep investment in the product. And so when I think product led, I think people tend to think that means kind of, self-serve, self-sign up, like products bringing in, or maybe they even have a revenue goal. And so we don't have that at Rippling, but product is certainly leading the company in terms of pushing the envelope on what we build and what we think of our platform. And really it's managed in an extremely ambitious, metrics-driven way, very similar to sales, actually. They both report into Parker. I think that's one of the reasons that Parker is truly, I think, one of the greatest founders ever, is he owns both the engineering kind of, roadmap and product, and that rolls into him, and he owns the sales kind of funnel, and he's able to make the trade-offs between those two to understand like what's the right stuff to build to unlock sales in the right way. So it's a good partnership here. I think that's it.
There's so-called product-led growth, which is the idea of like, oh, well, you don't really need salespeople. The product can kind of sell itself using clever growth hacks and growth loops and so on. And I agree that every PLG company eventually moves into enterprise and has a sales team. But there's also internally, which I think is a sense of some companies say we're product-led. We think about the product first. We talk to potential customers, and then whatever we build, it's nearly about who controls the roadmap. Does the product team control the roadmap, or does the sales team control the roadmap? And I think what you're saying, which I agree with, is ideally you have a close and tight collaboration. So it's not about, is it mine or is it yours? It's sort of ours, and we come up with it together.
It's on us in sales, and I alluded to this earlier. We need to show up with data, conviction, and make a compelling argument. But then the R&D org decides with that information, what are they going to build? And it's not a black and white kind of thing. Like if he prioritized something because they believe, then like we're going to have that conversation. But I do think it's on us in sales to present them with the information, and then they know the roadmap. They know what's hard to build, what's not hard to build, what they can sequence together in parallel, what has to come sequentially. Like, I think you just got to give them the information and then trust that they're going to make the right choices.
That makes a huge amount of sense. And again, I think it's something we talk about so much on this podcast, is just the importance of communications and alignment between different parts of the business. And unfortunately, I've seen some of the greatest misalignment tends to happen between the sales and the R&D or the product orgs. But when they are in harmony, beautiful things can happen. And, I can see that happening at Rippling. So As you know, Loop, I approached you, Rippling, as a sponsor for this podcast because I saw what you were doing and I was really excited. I want to make sure that our sponsors are companies and products that I can really get behind, that I can see solve real problems for founders and startups. And the headache of all of this sort of back office workforce management, the fragmentation of it is something that I've experienced personally and seen so many other founders experience personally as just a drag on their ability to get things done. So I was so glad that I could get you on as a sponsor. And also, for this topic, you were like, let's not talk just about rippling. Let's talk about something that's really valuable for people building a sales team. But I really did want to get your sense of like how the vision of rippling aligns with what founders are trying to do, because I actually think, it's really a great thing that you're being done. And it's quite contrarian in a sort of a surprising way for a startup. So I'd love it if you could just give us a quick rundown of, Rippling's philosophy and what the product is and how it works.
So the first thing I would say is that the mission statement of our company is free smart people to work on hard problems. We really tried to make that not tech focused and founder focused, because I think that message applies broadly to companies that are, whatever, if you're a nonprofit, if you're in retail, if you're in whatever, the founders of businesses, the presidents, the owners, et cetera, should not be spending time dealing with like back office administration work. It limits what you can turn your company into. And so at a very macro level, particularly for a startup founder friendly community, it's like free smart people to work on hard problems. Let us automate the back office work and do all of that. Now, that's a punchy tagline. I think at the end of the day, there's really a couple of things that are unique and different about Rippling in the particular space that we're in, which is an incredibly crowded space, right? There are probably 10 public HCM companies in the US. There are their own versions, smaller markets, but their own versions of public and private in all of these different markets. There are certainly a few key players in this particular market in Australia. The first thing is that every single industry, whether in the US, most of these payroll companies started as payroll only, and then they built out over time a full suite of products. And they did that mostly through acquisition, white labeling. Like the whole industry in the US transformed to this like all-in-one HR. But it happened through legacy companies kind of gobbling up and stitching together these kind of products that, look and feel on the outside like they're all in one, but have these gaps in the middle. One of the things that's really unique about the international market is a lot of the kind of key players in these markets have actually started building from like an HR perspective, and then they've acquired payroll companies or they've integrated with payroll companies. But Rippling from day one is a entirely natively built product. Like we've never acquired a company, we've never white labeled anything. Like every single product within the Rippling suite is kind of built on top of this framework. And what that framework is at the very core of Rippling is employee data. It's a database of your employees. We call it the employee graph. If you think about like the social graph, Facebook back in the day, the social graph was all of this stuff about you and your identity as a person, and all these other things could link in and extract that information and you could do all this stuff. But we think of the employee graph is a kind of database of the employees in your company and all of the attributes about them. Obviously stuff like their name, title, department, salary, but also their performance reviews that they've been given, the candidates that they've interviewed in the applicant tracking system, the corporate card, expense approval, the software installed in their computer, like all of the things that are tied to that employee come back to this just rich repository of data. On top of the employee record, we have like a platform approach. We've invested a lot in policies, permissions, workflow, analytics, like all of the things that make business software powerful. And then you have the application layer. So you have payroll and talent management and device management and corporate cards and finance and all that stuff. And so at the end of the day, our goal is like when you go to hire somebody in your company and you type in Matt Loop, head of APAC, sales department, Sydney work office, and you go through this data entry, that just kind of unlocks this workflow to every other system that exists. Yes, we're going to set him up in payroll, get him paid correctly, all the right modern rewards stuff. Yes, we're going to get his contributions to the, super setup, and we're going to do all of the HRE stuff. But in addition to that, we ship out a pre-configured computer that shows up on day one with like all the software installed. We provision his account in G Suite and Slack and Salesforce and whatever tools that he needs, right? And so taking the employee identity in our market, it's like HR specific. Everyone wants to automate like the HR workflow. And we just think, look, it's actually much broader than HR. It's like business software at large needs access to information about your employees. And so we basically try to automate and share that information and keep one central system of record for employee data. And what that results in is just a lot of reduced admin work for trying to manage a company. If you're hiring people and you've got 7 different systems, the way they do this today, they go click Google and they're like, add user, and they type in Matt Loop, head of APAC, here's department. They go to Slack and they're like, add a user, Matt Loop, and they type all this stuff in. And it just creates a bunch of like, why should the world exist that way versus doing it once and having it kind of propagate everywhere? When somebody leaves, you revoke all that access. When they change departments or locations, everything gets updated. So I think that's at a high level, what we're trying to do is be a one-stop shop for kind of managing and running your business and your employees across all the different business applications that you might use.
Like I said, I've felt the pain, which is why I was so keen to work with you folks. It's really painful to set up all the vendors and then like all of that dual handling. And I love a good account executive. You know what I don't like is 10 account executives. Like one of the problems as a founder is like, God damn, like how many vendors do I need to deal with? You want one vendor and then you have this level of integration that I think is really valuable. And when I say it's contrarian, I think it's interesting what you can and cannot learn for our founders from here. Our general advice when you're building a startup is don't try to build a one-stop shop because you do not have the resources to do that.
Right.
So this is sort of the contrarian thing. And why is it possible for Rippling? Tell me if you disagree, but I think it's because Parker Conrad is a second-time founder. He's already had one massive success under his belt. And so he can come in and raise a lot of capital because he's like, I know what I need to build. It's going to be expensive, but he can still attract investors to do that. But I think in this case, it is exactly for the reasons you mentioned. It's a sort of ring fence where you want all of these things to work together from day one and not be bolted on. And so that's what Rippling is building. And, in my view, that's just incredibly needed out here in the ecosystem.
We appreciate it. And there's certainly, the bet is that long-term, why do we spend 60% of our revenue on R&D? The reality is most companies, even if they could do that from a funding perspective, they don't know what to build. Like they can't build enough product and features they can monetize. And so for us, our investment in R&D is a proven track record to our investors who approve our plans to do all this stuff, right? It's a proven track record of that investment turning into product that customers then buy and retain at very high rates, right? And so if you continue to do that year over year, then it's kind of like, why wouldn't you continue to invest in R&D if there's a high ROI there? And so we've been successful in that to date. And I think that obviously when we, get into the public market someday, like that'll kind of all be out there to see. But I think it certainly comes with a lot of like intention around how you build product.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a really exciting thing for the ecosystem. So folks, if you're listening and you're like, oh, this Rippling sounds pretty good, I might want to check it out. You should go to rippling.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast. I heard that Rippling's CRO, that must be you, Matt, has approved 3 months free for anybody coming through this link in any country in which Rippling operates. So that's very generous. It's worth giving this a try and seeing how much time it can save you in your startup. All right, Matt Plank from Rippling. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I've learned so much about how to build high quality sales teams. A few things I didn't expect. For example, the way of thinking about hiring a VP of sales. And so really valuable resource for all the founders out there. I appreciate you being so generous with your time and so generous in your support of the Startup Podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure having you both on.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Great to catch up.
Likewise. Now, if people do want to follow you on the internet, are you on LinkedIn? Where's the best place for people to follow you?
7 years working at LinkedIn, so I definitely have a profile there. Happy for people to jump on and follow me.
Same for me. That would be the place to reach out and drop a connection.
Thanks so much, guys. It's been a pleasure.